So he was obviously really upset by that. And so he got his shotgun and filled it with rock salt instead of bullets, like no ammunition. And he sat up all night and like waited and like hid for these boys to come back. And then he scared them and shot the rock salt like towards their backs as they ran away. Hello, welcome to another week of Mix It Up, Black History in the Restoration, where we mix up a recipe while we mix up the restoration by learning about early Black members of the church. My name is Taylor Ricks, and excuse my casual attire. I'm on the way to do some exercising, but I needed to get this recipe going in the crock pot for the day, so I thought we would do it at a different time than usual. So today we're going to make a family favorite, generations and generations. Like when I have this recipe, it is summertime, and that is our baked beans that we make. Baked beans in the crock pot or in the oven. And we are going to talk about Louis Leggroan today. So let's go ahead and get started. Louis, he is the son of Ned and Susan Leggroan. We've talked about them, we've talked about their kids, so he is their son. He was born after they had already come to the Salt Lake Valley, so he was born in Mill Creek, November 8th, 1875, before his family moved to Idaho. So he lived here in Mill Creek with his family for a little while, and then they moved to southeast Idaho, where his dad became a sheep farmer. I guess I need a spoon to get these beans out. So, in southeast Idaho, his dad was a sheep farmer, and none of Ned's kids ever wanted to grow up to be a sheep farmer, or I guess a shepherd, we should say. They were not fans. They helped their dad on the farm and did a good job, but they didn't want to continue to do it. So, when he was a young man, Louis moved back to the Salt Lake Valley. That's where he met Nettie James. Nettie is the son of Sylvester, and we talked about Sylvester a few weeks ago. We keep talking about his kids, and we don't have very many stories about him specifically. So he married Nettie James, which is also the granddaughter of Jane Elizabeth Manning James. So we just keep seeing like the Leggroan family and the James family seem to keep coming back up, and they seem to like marry each other and spend a lot of time together, and so we just keep getting to learn about their posterity, which is kind of fun. So he married Nettie, and they moved back to southeast Idaho after getting married, and once they moved there, they ended up living there for a little while. Then they lived in Boise, and that's where their daughters Thelma and Frances were born. And they lived there for a little bit, and then they moved back to Salt Lake again, or Mill Creek. So tons of moving, which I'm like, okay, I can't handle that much moving with like moving trucks and all of that stuff in like modern day. So the fact that they moved that much in the circumstances they were in is crazy. So they moved back to Mill Creek with their two little girls. After coming back to Mill Creek, they were expecting their third child, but Nettie had a heart condition. They aren't quite sure what happened, but unfortunately that condition claimed her life before that little baby was born. So he lost his wife and his unborn baby and became a single father. That is when, a little while later, he met his second wife, Alice Weaver. And he and Alice adopted a little boy named Philip. And I wish I knew more about the story of Philip's adoption, but that's all I really know. So he was now the parent of Philip and Frances and Thelma and Alice's children from her first marriage. And they lived on a 6-acre farm in Mill Creek. And he decided that what he wanted to farm was fruit. And so he became a fruit farmer, and he grew a variety of fruits. He grew grapes and peaches. He also grew a wide variety of vegetables. And a 6-acre farm at the time, like that sounds like a lot of exhausting land to me, but at the time it really wasn't very much land, and most people had much bigger farms. So a lot of people say that he did like amazing things with the small little 6 acres that he had. He was able to get a lot of bounty out of that small land, which speaks to the fact that he was probably a very talented farmer. And also he practiced like farming sheep with his dad, or livestock. And so I think it's very impressive that he was able to learn the trade of farming fruits and vegetables, and to do it really, really well under like a smaller land and more difficult circumstances than some people are able to do it. So that's really cool. I loved this story, and ever since we started this series almost 6 months ago, can you believe that? I have been excited to tell his story because there are stories recorded about him that are written by his daughter Frances, which makes it so much more personal. It makes it so much easier to like understand the man that he was. So this was my favorite story. You can learn more about him on the History of Black Mormons website that Paul Reeves kind of founded. But this was my favorite story. He loved to grow grapes, and he said that a lot of times the boys would come and like pick the grapes and eat them, and of course he didn't really appreciate them being stolen. But one time a bunch of kids came and he found perfectly deliciously good grapes had been cut off the vine and just left on the ground, which, like, anybody who knows anything, that is not cool. And so he was obviously really upset by that, and so he got his shotgun and filled it with rock salt instead of bullets, like no ammunition, and he sat up all night and like waited and like hid for these boys to come back, and then he scared them and shot the rock salt like towards their backs as they ran away, and did not have much issue with people wasting his grapes anymore. What I think is kind of funny about it is that I just can see like any dad doing that, like, I'm gonna teach these kids a lesson. Like, I could totally relate to him. And he also said if anyone ever needed any food or any grapes or anything like that, he would be more than happy to provide them with those. He just needed them to ask. And so I liked that story. I just like that he took no nonsense. But everyone just speaks of him as like a really loving and kind man. And his grandson, who was named after him, in fact, said that his grandpa always had overalls on, but that did not mean his grandpa was not smart and was a hick. He said he was very smart, he knew a lot of things, and he learned a lot from his grandpa. So I just absolutely love that story. Also during that time, his daughters just explain it as a time that was full of hard work, but also lots of love and enjoyment. So they were friends and related by marriage to the Bankheads, and they would all get together on each other's farms, and William Bankhead would play the violin, and they would dance the Virginia waltz, or the Virginia reel, or the waltz. They would just have a lot of fun together. Lewis was also super protective of his daughters, and he lived on like a really steep kind of high mountain, so it was hard for them to get to school. So he would take them to school on a sleigh during the winter, pulled by the horses. And he also was well aware of the trials that they faced regarding racism at school. So he gave one of his daughters an umbrella that she carried with her all the day, every day, to protect herself when racial things happened, just for her safety. And I don't know if she ever had to use it, but he did teach his daughters and his children to stand up for themselves, to take care of themselves. And also was really aware of what they were facing when they went to school. He was always remembered as someone who held very high standards and morals for himself. He taught that if you made a commitment, you followed through with it. So he told his daughters, like, when you get married, that needs to be a commitment that you follow through with forever. He just truly believed in holding up those standards. Then after a while, unfortunately, Alice also passed away, and he was able to remarry Ethel Austin. And Ethel was not a member of the church, but he stayed fairly active, because when he passed away at the age of 83 years old, he had his funeral in the ward that he lived in, and he is buried in the Eliason Burial Gardens, like many of the other families that we speak about that lived and farmed in Mill Creek. And he is buried next to all three, or near all three of his wives. But he leaves this rich legacy of being an amazing dad and an incredible farmer, and a hard worker and steadfast member of the church. And so that is the story of Louis Leggroan. So that is how easy this recipe is also. I just plug it in for a few hours, like 3 hours on high or low for 6 hours. And then these beans are just easy to go and delicious. Thank you so much for joining me for week 22 of Mix It Up, Black History and the Restoration. I'm Taylor Ricks, and I will see you all again next week. Goodbye.